In the waning days of 1888, the wind howled a mournful eulogy over the skeletal remains of Belmont, Nevada. This forgotten silver town, nestled in the desolate heart of Nye County, was a place where hope had been mined out along with the ore. It was here, against the backdrop of a vast, indifferent sky, that a young priest arrived with a simple, righteous mission to make the bell of the abandoned St. B. Augustine's church ring out once more, unaware that some silences are sacred, and some truths are buried for a reason. The story of Father Michael and the Belmont Bell is more than a local legend. It is a chilling investigation into the darkness that can fester in the heart of a community, a darkness hidden in plain sight, waiting for a tender hand to pull at a loose thread. We will unravel the cryptic journals, follow the silent clues, and descend into the belfry to uncover a secret so monstrous it silenced a town for a generation. What secrets does your town hold? Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and be sure to subscribe to Grim Inquiries so you don't miss a single step of this disturbing journey. Father Michael Harrigan first saw Belmont as God must have last seen it, a collection of faded hopes scattered across a barren landscape. The stagecoach ride from Austin, some 50 miles south, had rattled his bones and filled his lungs with the fine, abrasive dust of the Tequima Range. He was a man of 28, with a face too earnest for the cynicism of the fading century, and hands better suited to holding a book than a rein. His spade was a sturdy, practical thing, forged in the crowded parishes of Boston, but nothing there had prepared him for this profound emptiness. The town was a ghost of its former self. Grand brick buildings, the opulent relics of a silver boom, now stood with shattered windows like vacant eyes, their once proud facades surrendering to the relentless high desert wind. The air, thin and cold at nearly 7,400 feet, carried the metallic tang of defunct industry and the scent of sagebrush. As he stepped down from the coach, his black cassock whipping around his ankles, he felt the weight of a collective gaze. Faces watched from behind grimy panes of glass in the saloon. Figures paused mid-stride by the assayer's office, their expressions uniformly flat, unwelcoming. It wasn't hostility, not yet. It was a deep, weary stillness, the posture of a town that had been expecting its own funeral for a decade. His eyes found his destination, perched on a low rise overlooking the grid of decaying streets. St. Augustine's Catholic Church. It was a magnificent contradiction. A brick-and-stone Gothic Revival cathedral in the middle of nowhere, its steeple a finger of faith pointing at a sky that seemed to offer none. It was beautiful, defiant, and utterly, terribly silent. This was his charge, to breathe life back into this stone body, to be the shepherd to a flock that looked as if it had long since scattered. His first order of business was to secure lodging and supplies. The Belmont Hotel was a skeletal structure, only a few rooms habitable, managed by a gaunt woman named Mrs. Cable, whose voice was as dry as the floorboards. At the general store, the proprietor, a man with a thick, graying beard named Elias Thorne, stood behind the counter like a sentinel. He was the grandson of the town's founder, Alistair Thorne, a name whispered with a complicated mix of reverence and resentment. Thorne's eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, assessed the young priest with an unnerving placidity. A priest, Thorne stated, not asked. The bishop must be running out of God-forsaken places to send you boys. Michael offered a polite smile. God is found in all places, Mr. Gorn. Even the quiet ones, Thorne grunted, weighing out flour and salt pork. It was then that Michael first saw the girl. She sat on a crate near the back, half hidden by sacks of grain, sketching in the dust on the floor with a slender finger. She couldn't have been more than 10, with a wild mane of dark hair and eyes so large and deep they seemed to hold the starved darkness of a mine shaft. She wore a simple, patched dress, and when she looked up, her gaze met Michael's with an intensity that startled him. There was no childish curiosity in her eyes, only a solemn, ancient knowing. When Michael smiled at her, she didn't react, her expression unchanged. Thorne followed his gaze. "That's Laura," he said, his voice low. "Don't mind her. She has no tongue for pleasantries." The phrase was odd, but Michael let it pass, assuming the man meant she was shy or simply rude. He would later learn that Elias Thorne's words were, in a terrifyingly literal sense, the absolute truth. The girl was a mute. The following morning, under a sky the color of dull pewter, Father Michael took the heavy rusted key given to him by Thorne and approached St. A. Augustine's. The sheer scale of it was baffling. In a town that even in its 1870s heyday had only a few thousand residents, someone had built a church that could serve a small city. Its grandeur spoke of immense ambition, or perhaps immense guilt. The heavy oak doors groaned open, releasing a breath of cold, stagnant air that smelled of decay and petrified incense. Inside, a cathedral of dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light piercing the grimy stained glass windows. Pews stood in silent rows, coated in a fine gray powder. The altar, though tarnished, was carved from a single massive piece of mahogany. But it was the silence that was most profound. It was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all other sound. It seemed to emanate from one place in particular, the bell tower. Leaving his satchel on a pew, Michael found the narrow, winding staircase that led upward. The wooden steps protested his weight with loud, percussive creaks. The air grew colder as he climbed, the smell of dust replaced by the scent of old wood and roosting birds. He emerged into the belfry, a square chamber open to the elements through 4 arched windows. And there it was, the bell. It was colossal, a bronze behemoth easily 5 feet in diameter, its surface covered in a greenish patina. The name of its founder was cast into the metal, Alistair Thorne, 1868. But as Michael stepped closer, a deep sense of unease settled over him. Something was fundamentally wrong. He ducked under the lip of the bell and looked up into its dark, cavernous mouth. It was empty. The bell had no clapper, no tongue to give it a voice. It was a giant, muted mouth hanging in an eternal, enforced silence. Confused, Michael searched the belfry floor, thinking the clapper must have fallen or been removed for repairs. He found nothing but bird droppings and decades of debris. His gaze then fell upon the structure supporting the bell. It was excessive. The main yoke it hung from was normal enough, but below it the floor was reinforced with thick, heavy timbers and crossbeams fastened with massive iron bolts, far more than would be needed to support the bell's weight. And then he saw the ropes. Not the simple pole rope he expected to find, but a complex system of thick, heavy-duty ropes and pulleys anchored to the reinforced floor. They weren't attached to the bell's yoke at all. They seemed designed to hoist something heavy from the ground floor, straight up into the center of the belfry, to a point just below the silent bell. What conceivable purpose could such a mechanism serve? It looked less like part of a church and more like machinery from the nearby mines, crude, powerful, and built for heavy lifting. It was his first glimpse of the church's true, hidden architecture, the first clue that Saint Nom, Augustine's, was built to house a ritual far darker than any mass. He felt a sudden, inexplicable chill that had nothing to do with the biting wind whipping through the arches. The silence of the bell was not an accident of time or neglect. It was intentional. This tower had been designed for a different kind of sound. In the small Spartan priest's quarters attached to the sacristy, Michael discovered another relic of his forgotten predecessor. Up away at the bottom of a wardrobe, beneath a pile of moth-eaten vestments, was a small, leather-bound journal. The ink on the first few pages was neat, the script that of a man filled with purpose. September 1877, it began. I have arrived in Belmont. The bishop calls it a challenge. I call it a blessing. The church is a marvel, though the congregation is sparse. They are a hard people, forged by the rock and the silver they pull from it. They seem to fear the church as much as they revere it. The entry was signed by a Father Abram. As Michael turned the pages, the entries grew shorter, the handwriting more agitated. Abram wrote of the town's peculiar superstitions, their obsession with the prosperity of the mine, and their deep-seated aversion to his questions about the church's history, especially about the bell. They call themselves the Congregation of Dust, one frantic entry read, a name they whisper. They say the ground gives its gifts only when it is pleased. What unholy bargain has been struck in this place? Then, a chilling passage from his final weeks, the tower, there is something wrong with the tower. The resonance is all brown. I hear it in my sleep, a sound that is not a sound, a vibration in the bone. They watch me now. Thorne's grandson never lets me out of his sight. He knows that I am close to understanding what they did here. The last entry, dated March 1878, was a barely legible scrawl. They will not let me consecrate it. God has no place here. This is not a belfry. It is a crucible. After that, the pages were blank. Official records stated that Father Abram had succumbed to mountain fever and was buried in the town cemetery. Reading his words, Michael felt a cold certainty that the priest's death had been anything but natural. Determined to restore the bell's voice, if only to defy the oppressive silence, Michael visited the town blacksmith. The smithy was a low, soot-stained building where the rhythmic clang of a hammer provided Belmont's only consistent pulse. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Silas, with arms as thick as posts, stopped his work as Michael entered. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed by a permanent suspicion. Michael explained his purpose simply. I wish to hire you to forge a new clapper for the church bell. Silas spat a wad of tobacco juice into the dirt floor. He didn't even consider it. No, he said, the word a flat iron wall. Michael pressed. It's a holy instrument meant to call the faithful to prayer. Silas turned back to his anvil, his massive shoulders a clear dismissal. That bell's had its say, he growled without looking back. Some things are better left silent. You'd do well to learn that, Father. The finality in his voice was absolute. This wasn't a refusal based on price or difficulty, it was a prohibition, an edict enforced by the entire community. As Michael left the smithy, the weight of the town's collective secret pressed in on him. He was no longer just a priest restoring a church, he was an intruder, an investigator trespassing on sacred, blood-soaked ground. Walking back through the main street, he felt the familiar sensation of being watched. He turned and saw her, Alara. She stood across the street, a small, still figure, her dark eyes fixed on him. When their gazes met, she didn't run or look away. She simply held his gaze, a silent witness to his unwelcome inquiries. Over the next few days, a strange rhythm developed. Alara became Michael's shadow. She never spoke, never came too close, but she was always there. While he worked, sweeping out the nave of the church, she would sit on the stone steps outside, drawing patterns in the dirt. He tried to speak to her, offering her a piece of bread or a kind word, but she would only stare back with that unnerving, sullen gaze. Then she began leaving him things. They were like offerings, or perhaps clues, in a language he didn't understand. One morning he found the perfectly formed, glistening piece of silver ore on the doorstep of his quarters. The next day, a single, jet-black raven's feather. Then came the most unsettling of all, a small, hand-carved wooden horse, its paint faded and its edges worn smooth by a child's hands. It was an old toy, a cherished one. Each object felt laden with meaning, a piece of a puzzle he couldn't yet assemble. She was communicating, he was sure of it, trying to guide him. But to what? He felt a growing conviction that this silent child, dismissed by the town as a simple-minded mute, was the keeper of its darkest secrets, the only one willing, or able, to point him toward the truth buried at the heart of the terrifying silence. Night after night, Michael pored over Father Abram's journal, searching for a key to unlock the town's pact of silence. He found another passage that chilled him to the bone. Abram had been researching the town's history, trying to understand the paradox of its founding. Alistair Thorne, the patriarch, was a man notorious for his ruthless capitalism. He had a reputation for breaking unions and running his mines with a callous disregard for human life. And yet, this was the man who had spent a fortune, a significant portion of his initial silver strike, to construct the magnificent St. Prominence. Augustine's. It made no sense. Abram wrote, "The town-bounding myth is a lie. Prosperity did not bring the church. They believed the church brought the prosperity." The records are clear. The truly rich veins of the Highbridge lode were not discovered until the spring of 1869, 6 months after the first ringing of the bell. The townsfolk speak of it as the offering, or the first tithe. They believe the sound itself awakened the silver in the mountain. Michael's blood ran cold. A tithe. An offering. Abram had scrawled a frantic sentence in the margin, "Thorn with no man of God." He was a pragmatist. He saw faith not as a path to salvation, but as another tool, another piece of machinery. He did not build a house for God. He built a factory for miracles. Michael now understood the townsfolk's fear. They did not fear God's judgment. They feared the silence of the bell because it meant the end of their covenant, the end of the terrible machine that had brought them their fortune. The investigation has taken a dark turn, and the truth seems to be buried deeper than any silver vein. To ensure you're with us as Father Michael uncovers the final, horrifying pieces of this puzzle, make sure you subscribe to Grim Inquiries. The breakthrough came on a frigid afternoon when the sky threatened a winter storm. Michael was attempting to clear the overgrown path behind the church when he saw Ilara. She stood at the edge of the property, beckoning him with a subtle tilt of her head. For the first time, she was not just watching, she was leading. He followed her away from the town, up a windswept hill to a small, forgotten cemetery. The wrought iron fence had long since collapsed, and the grave markers were tilted and weathered. This was not the main town cemetery. It was older, more neglected. Ilara walked with purpose through the tall, dead grass, her small feet sure on the uneven ground. He led him to a section at the far end, away from the few marked graves of early settlers. Here there were no names, just a series of low, rough-hewn granite stones, nearly 20 of them, arranged in a neat row. Each stone bore a single carving, a year, 1869, 1870, 1871. The dates continued, one for each year, until the last one. And Laura stopped before it and placed her small hand on the cold stone. Michael knelt, brushing away the dirt. The year carved into it was 1878, the year Father Abram's journal ended, the year, according to town lore, that the silver ran dry and the bell fell silent forever. He looked at the row of anonymous markers, a cold, sickening realization dawning on him. These were not graves. They were records, a ledger carved in stone. That night, a storm broke over Belmont, the wind screaming around the corners of the church like a tortured spirit. Tucked inside, with only the flickering light of a kerosene lamp, Michael frantically pieced together the final, terrible clues. Abram's journal, Ilara's tour of the stone ledger, the tongueless bell, the strange machinery in the tower, it was all swirling into a single monstrous image. He found the passage he'd overlooked, one he had dismissed as the ramblings of a feverish mind. Abram wrote of the terrible resonance the sacrifice needed to strike the chord. Then, under a drawing of the bell, was the sentence that now burned itself into Michael's mind. The tongue is not of iron, but of flesh. He finally understood. The Congregation of Dust, the secret society of Belmont's founders, had not struck a bargain with God. They had made a pact with the earth, consecrated in blood. The annual offering he'd read about wasn't money or prayer. It was a person. The row of stones in the cemetery marked the years a sacrifice had been made. 1878 was the year it had stopped. The year the offerings had failed. He stared at the words. The tongue is not of iron, but of flesh. He felt a wave of nausea, his heart pounding with the terror of a truth that was far more horrific than any ghost story. The secret of Belmont was not just murder. It was a systematic, ritualized human sacrifice performed in the house of God itself. With trembling hands and a sense of absolute dread, Michael ascended the belfry stairs one last time. He was no longer a priest seeking to restore faith. He was an archaeologist of horror, unearthing a crime of unimaginable depravity. The wind howled through the arched windows, making the massive bell sway slightly, its silence more menacing than any sound it could produce. He ignored the bell itself now, his attention fixed on the heavy, over-engineered platform beneath it. He ran his hands along the thick timbers, the cold iron bolts. It wasn't just reinforced, it was a cage, a harness. He saw it all in his mind's eye, the heavy ropes and pulleys hoisting not equipment but a human body, bound and helpless. He stomped on the floorboards, searching for any inconsistency. Near the center, one board gave a hollow echo. Using his knife, he pried at the edges. It came loose, revealing a dark, shallow compartment hidden beneath. The smell that rose from it was faint but sickening, the smell of old leather and old fear. Reaching inside, his fingers brushed against something stiff and cold. He pulled it out. It was a set of thick leather restraints, straps and buckles designed to hold a person's limbs immobile, and beneath them a small, black ledger. His hands shook as he opened it. The pages were filled with neat, spidery script. It was a log book. Each entry had a date, a name, or a description like drifter, male, approx, 40 and a weight in pounds. It was the list of the sacrificed. The Choir of Belmont, as the ledger was titled. Ah! He scanned the names, a litany of the lost and forgotten. The final entry was dated October, 1878. The name was Anna. Beside it, a brief, chilling note. Yield poor. Daughter, mute. Spared. He dropped the book. Anno, Elara's mother. Elara, the silent girl, had been spared. She was not born mute. She was the lone survivor of a lineage of sacrifice, silenced by the trauma of what she knew or what she had almost become. He now saw the full, diabolical ingenuity of Alistair Thorne's machine. It was a triumph of physics and a monument to human cruelty. The town's founders did not ring the bell in any conventional sense. They had created a horrifying sonic weapon, a resonance chamber of death. Each year, the Congregation of Dust would select a victim, an outsider, a vagrant, someone whose absence would go unnoticed. They would bind the person in the leather restraints and use the heavy pulley system to hoist them up, completely inside the cavernous bronze bell, a human clapper, a living tongue of flesh. The victim wouldn't be struck against the bell. That would have been too crude. Instead, a large, precisely weighted hammer, operated by a mechanism on the belfry floor, would strike the outside of the bell. The resulting sound wave, the pure, deafening resonance, would be trapped and amplified within the bell's cavity. The intense vibration and catastrophic pressure change would instantly kill the person inside through massive liquefying internal trauma. The pure, deafening ring that echoed across the valley, the sound the town believed awakened the silver from the earth, was, in fact, the sound of a human being's last silent scream, their body turned into an instrument of death. This was the source of Belmont's prosperity. Not silver, but a ritual of acoustic murder, repeated year after year, until the mountain finally refused to answer. The full horror of it settled upon Michael not as a sudden shock, but as a slow, creeping poison. This was not the act of a single madman. It was a covenant, a social contract signed in blood and sanctified by greed. Generations of Belmont citizens had been born into this knowledge. They had attended services in the nave of St. Augustine's, perhaps even prayed for a good yield, knowing full well the price was being paid in the belfry directly above their heads. He imagined the cold, pragmatic discussions of the Congregation of Dust, led by the Thorne family, as they chose their next victim. He pictured the blacksmith Silas, a man who refused to forge a simple clapper, perhaps using his skill to maintain the hammer mechanism. He saw the whole town as a conspiracy of silence, their faces hardened not by the desert wind, but by the weight of the secret they carried. Elara's muteness was the living embodiment of that secret, a trauma so profound it had literally stolen her voice. Her mother, Anna, had been the last offering, a final, futile sacrifice to a deaf and barren mountain. The little wooden horse she had given him, it must have been her mother's. A relic from a life stolen by the Bell. That evening Michael walked down from the hill, the ledger tucked inside his cassock. He did not go to the sheriff, who was likely a party to the secret himself. He went directly to the general store, where Elias Thorne was closing for the night. Michael didn't speak. He simply placed the ledger on the counter. The old man looked at the book, then at Michael. There was no surprise in his pale eyes, no fear. Only a deep, unbreachable weariness. "My grandfather was a practical man," Thorne said, his voice a dry rasp. "He believed that for a community to survive, sacrifices must be made. One life, a life with no ties, no name, to feed 100 families for a year. It is the cold arithmetic of the frontier. There was no apology, no confession. Just a statement of fact." In that moment Michael knew there would be no justice, no reckoning. The crime was too old, too deeply woven into the fabric of the town. To expose it would be to destroy the living as well as the dead. He left the ledger on the counter and walked out into the cold Nevada night, the church of St. Same. Augustine's a dark silhouette against the stars. Father Michael Kerrigan never held another service in St. Augustine's. The church remained a silent, unconsecrated tomb. He did not leave Belmont, however. He stayed, trading his priest's collar for the simple clothes of a layman, taking odd jobs to support himself. His true purpose was Alara. He became her quiet protector, a guardian against the ghosts of the town. Belmont continued its inexorable slide into obscurity, its houses and hopes crumbling back into the dust from which the congregation had tried to build a kingdom. Years passed. Under Michael's patient care, the profound silence that had imprisoned Alara began to fracture. It started with small sounds, then whispered single words. She was reclaiming the voice that had been stolen from her mother's lineage. The bell in the tower never rang again, its silence a far more powerful sermon than any sound it could ever make, a permanent monument to the town's terrible secret. The story of the Belmont Bell serves as a harrowing reminder that the most terrifying monsters are not born of fantasy or folklore, but are forged in the crucible of human desperation. It teaches us that a community can be held together not just by faith, hope, and charity, but by a shared and terrible sin, the silence of saint and dust. Augustine's was not proof of God's absence, it was a testament to the chilling bargains we make in his shadow and the price paid by the voiceless. What do you think is the most disturbing aspect of Belmont's secret? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to Grim Inquiries for more investigations into the dark corners of history.